So today, welcome to the CAFS How to Write a Conference Abstract webinar. As I said, we're really very pleased to have Irena Knezevic and Michael Classens here. They are longtime figures in CAFS. Michael is the president of the Canadian Association for Food Studies, and Irena, in addition to being a wonderful professor and thinker, and Irena is also a wonderful thinker and doer, and a former organizer of the conference, and also a wonderful professor in communications at Carleton University. So with that, maybe we can go to the next slide, and I think we'll have Irena kick it off. Irena, if you'd like to say anything about why you're here and why you'd like to share your ideas, please do.
Thank you for that generous preface, David, and many thanks to you and Michelle for organizing this. So welcome, everyone. As David said, I am a former organizer of the CAFS conference, and my first CAFS meeting was in 2005, when it wasn't even a formal association. We actually just met during the Congress of the Humanities and Social Sciences at Western University in London and talked about starting an association. In the following year, we had our first conference. So I have quite a bit of experience with these conferences, but what I'm going to do today is really kind of offer some kind of general tips on how to write a good abstract for a conference like this. Whether you've done conference presentations before or not, I find even just sitting in on workshops like this sometimes is even useful for me to kind of remind me of the useful strategies of doing this. So without taking up too much more of your time. Oh, and I guess I should say in terms of my introduction, I have a profile at Carleton University webpage for communication and media studies. So if you want to know more about me, look it up. I don't want to take up the time talking about myself too much today. So if we can go to the next slide, I'll get us going. So a couple of things that I find personally very useful is to kind of think about what are the questions that you're trying to answer when you're writing an abstract, because somebody's going to be reading your abstract expecting to find certain kinds of information in there. And the questions I have here are, take note, these are not the 5 W's that are also often recommended in journalism. These are actually questions that are often thought of in relation to adult education. So they kind of address the kinds of things that adults want to know when they're trying to learn new things. And I find that this is a really useful way to think about how you write your abstract. And that is that you might want to try to answer as many of these 5 questions as you can. And we say be sure to answer them, meaning think about whether you can answer all of these questions, because ideally you want them all answered. So your abstract should tell the reader what your presentation is about, why it's important to talk about it, how. So typically this is where we think about our methods and methodologies, but you might be presenting more of a literature review or work in progress. So you might want to talk about processes and procedures, but the results, the things that you want to be presenting at the conference, you should say something about how you got to them. And that could be something as simple as saying, through focus groups, with such and such demographics, I arrived at these conclusions. You should also consider these 2 questions that are often overlooked when we think about how we report research, but are incredibly important when we think about how we mobilize new knowledge. So how we mobilize things that we've actually learned through our research. And those are the 2 questions of so what and now what. This is what adult audiences care about. They want to know why what you're telling us about is important. And if you've presented a compelling set of findings, what can we do next? And what can we do next could be about taking action and providing recommendations if you're doing policy-related research, but very often it really refers to what are some of the future directions for research arising from the things that you've just covered in your work. Next slide, please. And so as you think about how to try and answer these 5 questions in your abstract, because abstracts don't give you a lot of space, typical conferences will ask for abstracts anywhere between 150 and 300 words. So obviously that's not a lot of space to actually say what you want to say. So here's some additional tips that might help you think through how to write an effective abstract. One that will grab the reviewer's attention quickly and convince them that they should include your presentation in the conference you're applying to. So a couple of quick do's and don'ts. Do choose a catchy but informative title. So make sure that your title is informative, but not boring and not too long. I recently actually saw a journal article title that was 37 words long, and I literally bristled when I saw that. So try not to be overly wordy, but make sure your title isn't just catchy and fun, but it actually informs your audiences right off the bat whether this is something that they would be interested or not in. So make sure that you include some keywords from your research, but keywords that are inclusive but not overly general. So keywords that cover what you're doing but are not so broad and vague that your audiences are not really sure what you're talking about. And have confidence in your ability and knowledge. I can't emphasize this enough, especially with graduate students, but I think most of us who work in academia struggle with this, is the confidence in our own ability and knowledge, and feeling like we constantly have to justify and explain away what we're doing. When you're presenting at a conference, you're presenting because you have something to say. So do develop some confidence in your ability and knowledge. We recommend, as I mentioned, that you don't pick keywords that are too unique to your research, because it's really unusual for somebody to be searching exactly for what it is that you're studying. You want your research abstract to be searchable and discoverable in the different areas of studies that your work can contribute to. We also really emphasize the need to not include references in your abstract. Sometimes it is necessary to say that you're taking a particular theoretical approach to something, but in general, including citations in your abstracts makes your abstracts too clumsy, too awkward and cumbersome, and it's really difficult sometimes to include in conference programs, because if you include citations, but there's not a full reference at the end, there's no purpose to your citations. But most conference programs would not include a reference list with your abstract. So be judicious about that and try and avoid citations if at all possible. And one of the biggest things that I find a lot of us really tend to do is to think that our audiences are going to be as excited about our work as we are, and that we should just write a mystery novel where we don't tell them what we actually found in our research and what our conclusions are. That is not how scholars pick presentations that they want to go to and listen to. That is not how scholars pick articles that they want to read. We want to know the answer right away. So do not plan for a big review at the end of your abstract, or some kind of a mysterious conclusion that sort of entices your audiences to come to your presentation to find out the answer. That doesn't work in scholarship. Next slide, please. So this is, I'm going to take just a couple more minutes to talk about this, and this will be the last for me, and I'll hand it over to Michael. Think about who you're writing your abstract for. And one of the challenges with conference abstracts is that you are actually writing it for two different audiences. So the first one will be the evaluation committee, folks who are going to be reviewing abstract submissions and deciding whether your presentation will be included into the conference or not. But they will also be reading your abstract with the conference attendees in mind. So wanting to make sure that your abstract is not only interesting and enticing, but also accessible to the audiences that we expect to be attending a conference. And so you're really kind of speaking to two audiences, but you also know they kind of fall in the similar category of scholars who are already at least partially, hopefully, interested in the kind of work you're doing. So the evaluation committee will be reading our abstract with quality and relevance in mind. So quality, that's across the board, really to think about, is the submission original or distinctive in some way so that people will want to go listen to your presentation? Is it thought-provoking? Is the abstract description well written? So if it requires a lot of editing and working through, conference committees might be reluctant to accept abstracts like that, because it might signal that your work isn't quite polished for presenting yet, and is it coherent in purpose and potential outcomes? Relevance is something that will be specific to every, so this applies, the first part on quality applies to every conference. Relevance will be specific to each conference you apply to. So we're going to be looking for, or review committees will be looking for whether your submission is appropriate for this specific conference and this association. And also, is it relevant more broadly to food studies research, which is what we try to showcase at this conference, so food studies research theory and practice. So I'm going to hand it over to Michael to kind of delve a little more into the specific context of Food Studies Conference.
Okay, great. Thanks, Irena. Yeah, and maybe just before I start as well, I just want to, I'm going to express my gratitude and thanks, of course, to Michelle and David for organizing this and for all the work that they're doing organizing the conference. So a first point to emphasize is that you don't need to be presenting finished work. You know, the truth is that conferences are really an opportunity to sort of workshop ideas. So, you know, the fact that you want to write a strong abstract notwithstanding, don't feel that you need to have everything sorted out. In fact, conferences are a great way to get feedback on on work in progress. Following from that, you should also not feel that you need to present your entire project. If you're working on a master's thesis or a PhD thesis, you just won't have time in 12 to 18 minutes to present on the whole thing. So, you know, choose a specific piece that maybe you want some feedback on, or that you want to try out, right? And present on that. You know, so this idea of saving something for the next conference, you know, saving something for, you know, another piece of writing, etc. I think another key point to underscore here is, you know, don't spend hundreds of hours preparing necessarily. So there's a couple of reasons for this. I think instrumentally, you don't want to, I mean, you probably just don't have time to spend, to spend 6 days creating a conference presentation. And in fact, you shouldn't, you know, you shouldn't spend that much time doing it. I also think you don't necessarily want to over prepare for a conference presentation at the risk of it sounding sort of rote or like overly rehearsed. And this gets to the kind of final point in this slide, which is maybe thinking a bit about kind of where you are as a presenter. You know, I was saying as we were sort of meeting to sort of plan this webinar that it may be a kind of unpopular opinion, but I like people who, as long as they're, you know, putting a bit of sort of character into it, I actually like people who just sort of get up and read papers. I find that a sort of a very compelling way to present. But some people don't. They would rather someone sort of speaking off the cuff, or someone, you know, more of a performer, more of a storyteller. So maybe think a bit about what you're most comfortable doing, and then feel free to sort of engage in any of those kinds of styles. You know, you can ask colleagues, friends, parents, etc. for feedback if you feel like sort of doing dry runs. That's always a kind of an opportunity to, just get some reps in, essentially, right? Okay. Another thing to keep in mind, I think, is that CAFS is, of course, a food studies conference, and this is actually a rare thing. You know, there are only a handful of food studies associations in North America, and we're actually, you know, really there's a counterpart sort of in Quebec, but in terms of English language, or, you know, primarily English language, although we're, of course, a bilingual association, CAFS really is the only annual conference that you'll find outside of Quebec. And that's an important thing, and it's a kind of rare thing. So it's an opportunity to sort of really get down to the meat of your work. You know, often I think many of us are probably situated in kind of interdisciplinary contexts. So we're maybe in a history department or a communications department or environment, where we maybe need to do a bunch of preamble to sort of get to the food stuff. You don't need to do that in this context. I think that we'll all have some general understanding of the basic terms and sort of theories, concepts, etc. that you're working with, so you can kind of get right to the meat of your argument. So there's a wide range of expertise in the room, though, within that sort of more narrow spectrum of food studies. So speak kind of broadly, but also very kind of specifically to your topic. And of course, it's always very important to avoid excessive jargon. And if you do have to sort of throw in a term or two that you think won't be sort of readily kind of identifiable or understandable, then maybe you can, but just sort of define them, right? And then this is important as well. Be sure to leave some time for feedback and questions, critique, etc. I think probably many of us who have been to conferences have sat through those sessions where, you know, the speakers are given 15 minutes and they take 25, and it's just very, it's not great. So try to leave a bit of time, so if you have 15 minutes, make sure that you stick to 15 minutes. Next slide. I think this is my final one. And so this is a really important point as well that I want to underscore, is that CAFS is, a safer, kind of more collegial environment than some other academic spaces. So, most of the people I think that you would encounter at the conference are going to be sort of friendly and helpful, and want to sort of like engage in sort of positive and helpful discussion. So again, use the conference as a way to kind of like preview or rehearse your ideas, and then be prepared to sort of even take notes, etc. During the discussion portion of the panel, that you can then bring back to the work to sort of strengthen, tweak, etc. Try to give something kind of original to your audience as well in exchange for their feedback. So again, don't bring necessarily the whole kitchen sink to the conference, but be very kind of selective in terms of what you're bringing to the conference, and try to maybe even frame your presentation in a way that will encourage and get people to think about what kind of feedback they might be able to offer you. Because again, I think you'll find that this is a very kind of collegial and supportive environment. Then what you can do, and I think that this is pretty common as well, is that you use a conference presentation to workshop an idea, and then you go away and work on it and turn it into the paper that you then submit. Now, of course, that process, there's always the specter of review or two once you submit to a journal, and that might be a less comfortable process at times. So again, enjoy your time and know that the CAFS, I think, environment is a safer and kind of more collegial one than you might find once you get out into the big bad world of actually submitting to a journal.
I'll pick up on a few other details, some of which in some ways parallel or echo what Irena and Michael have just said. But maybe they'll all come at it from a slightly different angle. But so when you are submitting your abstract through the Google form that we've set up for the CAFS conference, just know that, because we asked the question, what is your current life experience position? So we're asking basically, are you a graduate student? Are you an undergrad? Are you a senior scholar? Are you a community member who is not in the world of academia, but is doing work in food studies in some way? So that positioning is actually going to be the lens through which our evaluators will look at your abstract. So that sort of should be maybe a bit reassuring, but also think about how to write in such a way that sounds like you are writing from your current context, rather than trying to sound like someone who has more practice with some of the methods or some of the language or some of the whatever. So sound like yourself, because the evaluator will know who you are. You don't need to try to sound more senior than you are. Then, if for whatever reason our evaluation committee determines that the abstract as written is not at a stage that's ready for acceptance, we'll get back to you. And there's going to be an opportunity to resubmit based on some probably relatively light feedback, and resubmit your submission to see if you can maybe bring it just up to the level that will make it more conference ready. And if you get that feedback, don't feel bad about it. We've actually asked our advisors or our abstract evaluators to think about that as a process of helping you make this better so that you can participate in the conference. It's not about critique in the sense of you haven't done it right. It's about critique in the sense of here's how to do it better. So if it does get submitted a second time and accepted, then it's just a little stronger. We in CAFS generally really believe, and we love having graduate students, undergraduates at the conferences, which is not common to all conferences. Some conferences don't allow more junior scholars to participate. We, partly because we know CAFS is dependent on all of the extraordinary new students going through the education process to become CAFS members in the future. So we would like to have you there, and we want you to become stronger. So that's what this process is about. Good look at the next slide. So again, One of the things that happens at conferences is that as you're looking at the schedule in front of you, you go through the list, you find the names of your friends or your colleagues or the people who are doing work that is similar to you, and you go to those sessions. And so established scholars tend to be better known. They tend to have a bigger or more visible profile. So they often get more people in their room. Now, Michelle and I are going to try to program things so that we're not just putting all the famous people in one session and all the less famous people in another session and have it all be a dogfight to the death. We don't believe in that. But if your audience happens to be small in your room, take it as an opportunity. It's not a critique of how good you are or what your abstract looked like in the program. It's really often just about brand names, and that tends to happen at conferences. So it's an opportunity to make your presentation a little bit more intimate, a bit more personal. You can engage with the audience a little bit more. If there are only 6 people in the room, they're there because they want to be there, and they are not just picking things at random. So you can really use it as an opportunity to do maybe on the spot a slight modification to the way you present, or leave more time for a bit of discussion. It can make for actually some of the most valuable experiences when you connect with that 1 or 2 or 6 people at the conference who are doing just the kind of stuff that you're doing, or thinking in the same way that you're thinking, or concerned about the same issues. So you get to have a more private and sometimes a lot better presentation experience. And then nerves are completely normal, and they are always there. I often am told, if you're not feeling nervous, something's wrong. So use that energy, draw on it, let your voice quaver and then bring it back, and show the people that you're a real human being doing this work. That's what is so exciting to me about food studies, that it is intimately relevant to all of our lives. And the realness of us as human beings doing scholarship in food is what makes food scholarship interesting. So you don't need to be a perfectly modulated voice or a robot who's got no emotions. The nerves are there, let it propel you forward. And know that it will be done in 15 minutes, and then you can go and have coffee. Next slide, please. So again, being strategic with your abstract, look at the CFP carefully, because we do have a very robust theme associated with the Food Studies Conference this year that is connected to the overall theme of Congress. You can think about 2 different strategies. One is to diverge from that theme and go off in your own direction. Another is to stick to it. Our evaluation committee will be reading for whether or not the abstract is relevant to the CAFS conference this year. So sticking to it is sort of the safe bet. Diverging from it is a bit riskier, but we do accept abstracts of all sorts of varieties, and not everybody obviously is going to present on the themes of reimagining and reckoning and reconciliation. So it's an opportunity to have a theme to jump off from, and depending on how far you want to jump away from it is up to you. With the abstract, you do want to position yourself within, as Irena said, within a sort of global space of food studies, but also in a specific way that's distinctive to what you're doing. So you want the abstract to represent that specificity, as well as demonstrate how it fits into the larger picture of food studies. And again, as Irena said, that sense, and I've gone through many waves of this where I'm so doubtful about what I do, because my version of food studies doesn't really fit with a lot of other people's food studies, and I always think that I have to justify things or explain it. And so variously, I've had people tell me that I'm sounding too defensive or even shrill, which was my favorite bit of feedback from a committee ever. So you want to trust your own ability to express why this thing is important, that you want to talk about, without getting into that space of sounding like you think you don't belong. If you're doing food, you belong in CAFS. So whatever it is, trust that, and trust the fact that you're doing it and that you have experience and that you can express that experience through your own voice without trying to shore it up too much with the traditional or historical ways of making research legitimate in the eyes of others. Next slide. Then when you get to the presentation, I am also really bad at following this first bullet point. I love cute, weird, interesting bits of language. I love long, drawn-out compound sentences. I love ideas that are very general, and that is not what you should do. Do be focused and clear and specific. The people who are in the room they'll be coming in and out, dropping in and out of their conversation, paying attention, writing notes, probably texting in some annoying way. So if you use language that always brings you back to clarity, people in the room will get more from that presentation. You can reserve the fancier language or the longer, more involved stuff for an article eventually. Although Irena would say, no, keep writing in short, clear sentences if you're ever publishing. But that's a different kind of context. Think about this as it's a bit like a stage performance. You need the audience to stay with you, and that means having a kind of rhythm, a beginning, middle, and end, all the stuff that goes along with any kind of storytelling or performance. Again, in the presentation, don't get too caught up in what needs to be there for the eventual written article, that is all the lit review, the methods, the data, the findings, all this sort of stuff. Get into the discussion, get into why this is interesting. Of course, you need to position your work to say how you got there, but you don't need to tell us all about all of the demographics of all of the interviews of all of the people that you talk to, of all of the literature that you reviewed. That stuff can be assumed to a certain extent. Just make sure that we know where you're coming from and sort of what area of food studies you are situating yourself within. Timing, totally critical, because what we really want to do is get to that fabulous part at the end of the session, which is the Q&A, the discussion, the exchange, the sharing of ideas and references. So practice your talk, stick to the time. We're going to ask everybody to try to stick to 15 minutes. That can be negotiated in the room. If there are only 2 of you presenting and not 3 or 4, you can take a bit more time, but really try to stick to the 15 minutes, because there will always be time. Questions will expand into the time available. So practice and try to stick to the time. And having a timer in front of you is really useful. Our eyes are well used to being drawn towards screens. So if you have a phone with a stopwatch on it, that's a really useful way for me anyway, to make sure that I'm staying to time. And then if you are working with somebody who knows your work and knows how you're about to present or what you're about to present, check in with that person, or if it's not a supervisor, a colleague who also knows your work, maybe who's presented a few more times at a conference, to ask them what exactly needs to be spelled out and what doesn't, so that you can get to that balance between specificity and generality. And then what comes next after you've presented? Well, the Q&A obviously is part of it. Q&A is classically one of those hurdles to get through as a scholar, because audience questions are often veiled comments. It's actually someone saying, I disagree with you, and here's what I'm going to tell you about it. And they pretend that they're asking a question, but they're really not asking a question. So do what you can to extract value from that comment if it's not a real question. And you're also welcome to say, I'm not really hearing a question in there. Do you have something that you'd like to ask me, or do you have a statement that you'd like to make? And because everybody knows that everybody does this, you're not really putting that person too much on the spot. So it depends on how much you like confrontation, or to push back on people who are maybe not being as useful in the room as they might be. This happens, we all tend to do it, but again, trust your gut, own your agency, hold your space, and ask for what you need, because you're the one presenting. And then I always try to take notes after I've presented. Usually my adrenaline is pretty high, so I forget to do that sometimes. But if I take notes while someone's asking me a question, not only can I extract value out of that question if it's not a real question, but I can remember what the question was. And sometimes people ask compound questions, or I have 2 questions, a short one and a long one. And then they sort of spew it out, and you're like, wait a minute, where was the question in there? So taking notes is a really helpful way to stay on track and be able to remember how you want to respond. And then of course, after, after the Q&A, it's a chance for you to say, oh, right, someone mentioned a really interesting book. During their question, I want to go look that up, or whatever. Again, you can extract value more by writing notes down. And next slide. And then, because sometimes people spend 25 minutes presenting rather than their 15, there isn't always time to get to the questions or address all the questions during the session. So keep writing those notes as you're listening to people, or if you have an idea, or if you notice that there's someone in the room who's got expertise that you'd like to extract from them, follow up. There will be lots of social times and breaks during the CAFS conference, so you can expand the conference, you expand the discussion of the Q&A that happened during your session, follow up, say, hey, thank you so much for posing that question. Thanking someone for a question, thanking someone for a presentation is a fantastically easy way to break the ice. And since the conference is also largely about networking and finding your people, finding your community of food scholars that really help you zero in on what you want to do, that's really what I think the conference is so useful for. I generally, my rule to go by is that if I meet 1% of the total audience at a conference who really is aligned with my work, that's a win. So food is so broad, we often don't find 25 people who are doing the same kind of work we do. But if you find 1 or 2 or 3, that's incredible. And I was just at a conference in New York, and I cited Jack Halberstam's work on queer failure. And this person came up to me afterwards and said, that's so cool. I'm working on something similar. I'm really excited about this. And they were just over the top to have heard one person mention queer theory in a food studies conference. So that kind of specificity is really what makes, I think, conferences great. So celebrate even those 2 people that you meet. That's all I've got to say about the sort of general stuff about conferencing. And we've now got about 20 minutes for Q&A.
If somebody could elaborate just a little bit more on the theme of the conference, particularly what is meant with reckoning.
You do not need to stick to the conference theme, and please know that probably 80% of our submissions will not be that close to the conference theme, because people are always doing they will be submitting on the research that they're working on, and it doesn't always fall within those themes. That's meant to be a shaping element or a framing element, much more than necessarily a strict guideline for thematics. But in terms of reckoning, what we're trying to do with this conference is follow the overall Congress theme, who have talked about reimagining and reckoning. In our case, we're actually using reckoning, reimagining, and reconciliation as the themes for 3 plenary events. So we're already thematizing our conference with those plenary events. And reckoning is really coming face to face with what is going on that is problematic in terms of racism, oppression, exploitation, extractivism, and other related problematic practices in food systems, and food academia.
There are conferences that expect people to submit completed papers. I've helped organize some in the past. I've presented at some, and that is sometimes the case, because I think that would be sort of the more conventional, traditional approach to conference presentations. Because CAFS is so open to works in progress and is really invested in sort of supporting emerging researchers, and particularly grad students who are maybe halfway through their research project and can really use some feedback and insight. So CAFS does not expect you to have a fully written paper. Whatever notes you write for yourself, that will be your presentation, but it doesn't have to be a completed paper. Lightning talks, to answer the second part of your question there, are really, really short 5-minute presentations that are sort of, I would say, an academic version of the business term for the elevator pitch. So it's sort of a 5-minute overview of what you're working on and some key highlights of things you've already observed. So lightning talks typically will not include a lot of detail around your methodology or even your theoretical framework, but it will just highlight some key concepts and key aspects of your research methods and your preliminary findings, or whatever it is that you want to present. So they're really about presenting an idea as opposed to a more wholesome, comprehensive project.
And what we do is we program a bunch of them in one session simultaneously. So 6 to 7 to 8 lightning talks, as opposed to 3 or possibly 4 presentations. And so what the value is then the cross-fertilization that happens across the lightning talks. It's not about any one individual's presentation, but how we can think about and recombine all the ideas that are presented. They're really fun, and they're very, I mean, because they're fast, they have a lot of energy to them and people get flustered and there's a lot of performance stuff that goes on. But there are also great chances to cross-fertilize and get a taste of presenting without necessarily feeling like you have to deliver a full 15-minute paper.
Our supervisor suggested that 3 of us grad students here at SFU in the Food Systems Lab undertake a panel to share a collective research project that we're all kind of tackling different parts of it. Could you speak to the process of individually submitting abstracts, having them aligned, and coordinating panels more generally?
So for the submission process, the Google form has a question: is this a paper presentation or an organized panel or a lightning talk or some other things? So you would, in that case, submit a panel with the title of your panel and the names and email addresses of all of your panel participants. And then each panel participant also has to make a submission through the Google form with their individual subject and their individual abstract, and then indicate also that this is part of the organized panel, which the title has already been, which with the title that has already been submitted through the separate things. But Michael, what about how best to run a panel?
It's a great question. And I mean, so I guess there are a couple of different kinds. So one is if you already have a group, like it does sound like in your case, assembling a panel can be sort of just quite straightforward, you know the people, etc. What you could also consider is creating a call for proposals. Now the deadlines are getting quite close, I guess. You could still put together a call for proposals to see if there are others out there in the world who might want to, collaborate with you and join your panel potentially, who are doing work very similar. Maybe you find, students on the East Coast who are doing very similar work to what you're doing. And I think that's a really exciting opportunity at conferences. I mean, this is why I like to organize panels, because you can identify, the very specific group of people who like to geek out on the same things that you like to geek out on, which is very exciting. So it's sort of, it's pulling together, a community within a community, sort of.
There are a couple of questions in the chat, one from Madison about whether if we submit a 15-minute, like a regular paper presentation and it's not accepted, can you apply for a lightning talk instead? The answer to that is not really, because all submissions have to be made before December 1st and decisions about submissions won't be made until the new year. So what you could do is submit 2 things. You are allowed to submit up to 2 submissions per person of any type. So you could submit a 15-minute paper presentation and a lightning talk proposal, but just be aware that lightning talks, there's not a lower bar for lightning talks just because they are shorter. It's going to be subjected to the same fairly rigorous evaluation process. So if it's just a short version of your 15-minute paper presentation, there's not much value in that. But I would think about how you want to present more than what is more likely to get me accepted. I have a question from Ginny about working on a study with another undergraduate student. You can definitely present as co-authors or co-presenters, and you can co-present. You want to think about that, because with the 15 minutes, dividing it into 2 people presenting sometimes gets a little, just takes up a little bit more time, but you can certainly do that if you want. So you would just submit a single proposal with 2 author names attached, with one of you being the main contact for communications. And Rayhan had a question about whether there are any samples of successful abstract submissions.
All of our past conference programs are already on the CAFS website, so there's lots of examples.
And Michael has just popped a note in the chat with a link to the previous conferences, and the programs for those conferences are available there. Michelle, Ryan, is there anything we have forgotten to say that from your perspective should have been mentioned during this webinar?
One of the questions in the chat was whether or not it had to be in person. We have the option for virtual or in person, so you can specify which one you would like to do, and then we will arrange the infrastructure for that after the fact. So if you know now that you won't be able to attend in person, you can certainly just check that box in your Google form that you would like to present virtually.
Super. Well, that seems like we're done with 5 minutes to spare. World's most efficient webinar. Michael, Irena, any final comments?
Nothing from me except to say thank you all for joining today. And thanks again, Michelle and David, for organizing.
Yeah, same. I'll just echo that. Thanks, Michelle and David, for organizing. Yeah, and also I hope to see you all at York or virtually this spring.
We hope to see you soon. And until then, see you online. Take care, everyone.